In Demon Slayer, we've been introduced to many powerful characters and character groups like the Upper Moons and the Lower Moons and the Hashira, but have you ever wondered who the top 25 strongest characters in the series are? Well, in today's video, we're going to be ranking the top 25 strongest Demon Slayer characters, and in this video, unlike my Hashira video, this is solely going to be based off of strength and not a combination of like strength and intelligence and versatility and overall danger level, which in that video led to some Hashira being ranked higher than they would have been if this was purely down to strength and feats. So now that we've established this is mostly about power, let's jump into the top 25 strongest characters in the Demon Slayer story. So at number 25, we have Daki, and Daki at number 25 shouldn't come across like that much of a stretch. She was someone who Muzan himself acknowledged as being special and was strong enough that she consumed 7 Hashira during her lifetime. We've seen her flesh detachment be strong enough that she not only hold off Zenitsu and Inosuke, but she also gave them quite a bit of trouble in the Entertainment District arc when she did so. Even when she was in a weaker form and not fighting at full power, she was able to give Tanjiro trouble, and it's worth noting that this trio of Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu have grown stronger since they were in the prior arc in the series, so that's not a bad feat. When we see her fight against Nezuko, she's able to slash her in half and leave a wake of destruction in her path in the form of destroyed building. When Gyotaro's eye was implanted into her, she gets another power amp that was more than able to hold its own against Zenitsu's Thunderclap and Flash. Despite being only upper rank number 6 amongst the 12 Kizuki, she was an absolute monster and more than deserving of the number 25 spot on this list. At number 24, we have Nezuko. I don't think this is too much of a stretch to say that Nezuko goes over Daki when we consider how much stronger she appeared in the Swordsmith Village arc. Her power is even more impressive when we consider the fact that she never consumed any humans, and she's clearly stronger than every Lower Moon that we saw in this series, but she doesn't go high enough to get past Daki. Nezuko is a very powerful character due to a combination of things, most notably her blood demon art, which allows her to generate and manipulate demonic flames from her blood that are harmful to demons while also being harmless to humans. We've seen these flames also have the ability to slow down the regeneration of demons, with Daki's wounds taking longer to heal than normal and her needing the assistance of her brother. When she applied the flames to Tanjiro's Nichiren blade, she turned it red, which allowed Tanjiro to turn the battle against Hatengu's clones. We've seen at times that Nezuko is pretty talented in battle from a combat perspective, largely due to her raw strength, being able to fight against members of the 12 Kizuki and hold her own against the Upper Moons when she did fight against them. We also see she has an advantage that other demons don't, which is that she was able to regain her power without having to eat any humans, needing only enough time to sleep in order to recover, though she does have to sleep for long periods. When she goes into her full demon form, she's able to transform her body into her adult form, which gets a bigger boost in power, being able to do well against Daki in that fight and later on against Upper Moon number 4's clones. Her body is also special because as a demon, she developed a immunity to sunlight, something that even Muzan doesn't have. We've seen Nezuko in her adult form reattach her limbs that were cut off using her blood manipulation. Nezuko also makes this list despite her not being trained per se. Her reliance on brute strength alone and her ability to keep her composure in her adult form following the initial transformation where she did lose control makes her extremely deadly in battle, especially when she starts using those legs to deliver quick and powerful strikes. While Nezuko is strong during her time as a demon, she can't go any higher than 24 on this list, and as we start looking at the other characters, it becomes very clear why she can't go any higher than 24. At number 23, we have Kaigaku, the demon who replaced Daki and her brother as the Upper Moon 6 in the final arc. As Zenitsu's former senior, you expect him to be on this list, and 23 feels like the appropriate spot for him. As a demon, he has the benefit of having trained in the form of thunder breathing when he was a human, and he's more skilled at thunder breathing than Zenitsu if we only go by the number of techniques that he's mastered, but Zenitsu is actually superior. But we'll get to more of that when we reach Zenitsu. As a former demon slayer, he's extremely deadly, but when we factor in everything and according to Muichiro, if Kaigaku would have mastered his powers, he would have been able to kill Zenitsu, which is another reason why he's further down this list. That being said, as a user of thunder breathing, speed is definitely something that's a strong point for him, especially his reflexes. Also, when you factor in how much of Muzan's blood was ingested by him, he's even faster than he was when he was a human, and for a majority of his battle with Zenitsu, he was the one who was in total control of that fight, which makes a lot of sense. He was supposed to be the one who inherited the Thunder Hashira title at some point in the series. After becoming a demon, he was shown being able to manipulate actual lightning in battle, which only made his thunder breathing that much more impressive, which is a large part of the reason why he believed he surpassed thunder breathing style style itself. At one point, we see him nearly destroy Zenitsu's eyeballs and leave a significant amount of damage on Zenitsu, and in their battle, he was moving at speeds that gave Zenitsu quite a bit of a trouble to keep up with. As a thunder breathing user, we've seen him master 5 forms of thunder breathing, but ironically, he never mastered the first form, and even with the way that he used his blood demon art to amp up the speed, it makes you wonder how deadly he could have been if he would have been able to master the first form at some point and then amped up the first form by using his blood demon art. At number 22 and just outside of the top 20, we have Tengen Uzui. Part of the reason why Uzui is this far down the list is due to the fact that there are characters who awakened their Demon Slayer marks above him, so that does knock him down quite a bit, but positions 20 through 22 are interchangeable in my opinion, depending on which feats you give more weight to and how you view Tengen being poisoned in his fight. That being said, he's not exactly weak, but it is worth noting that Tengen did have trouble with Upper Moon 6 and his sister Daki, and though he was poisoned, it is worth noting that he had a lot of assistance in that fight, ranging from the help that his wives gave him to Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Inosuke. There's no question that had he been fighting alone, the battle against Upper Moon 6 and Daki, it would not have gone the way that it did, with Muzan himself even saying had Gyutaro fought by himself and not been weighed down by Daki, he would have won that battle against Tengen. I think we can all agree that despite Tengen having help, Tengen was clearly stronger than Daki, but when he was faced with Gyutaro, there were more than a few times it became clear he was boxing above his weight class, poison or no poison, and if given the task of fighting alone, he would have joined the long list of Hashira that Daki and Gyutaro had killed. The fact that he wasn't the one that landed the finishing blow on Upper Moon 6 and he lost his arm and his eye in the process and had to have Nezuko remove the poison from his body is another sign that really and truly he was boxing above his weight class here. If we take him at his own words, Tengen Uzui said that the other Hashira were stronger and more talented than him, and that does have to hold some weight. At number 21, we have Inosuke, and I put Inosuke above Tengen because I do believe following the training arc before the final battle that Inosuke surpassed him, because we saw a bunch of power cliffing in the final arc where characters leveled up, so that does have to get factored in. We know pretty early on that Inosuke is a beast. Inosuke throughout this series has shown that he's more than capable of growing in power, as well as things progress, being able to fight against someone as strong as Daki and do quite well against her in that fight, and this is before he even had the training arc that took place before the final battle. We even saw him manage to stand his ground against Upper Moon number 2 Doma in the final arc. When you factor in his superhuman flexibility, arguably second only to Mitsuri Kanroji's flexibility in terms of modern demon slayers, and his extreme senses, Inosuke, even when he enters into a fight where he's not the strongest, he's more than capable of being a persistent problem for whoever he's fighting. We see further evidence in this in just how well he stood his ground against Muzan despite being a lot weaker than Muzan. Inosuke wasn't getting one shot in that fight. When ranking Inosuke, his danger sense and flexibility have to be considered just because of how they're an integral part of his combat style. At number 20, I'm going to be going with Shinobu. While the Demon Slayer arm wrestling chart does have her towards the bottom in terms of physical strength, like Inosuke, there are combat feats that we have to consider that come in the form of the final arc that would put her in a battle sense higher, because again, the power cliffing in that final arc after the Hashira training is pretty noticeable. Like I said before, you can interchange 20, 21, and 22, but I feel pretty confident what we have here. While Shinobu doesn't have a Demon Slayer mark and she isn't even physically strong enough to cut off the head of a demon, she more than makes up for it in the way that she fights, and the fact that she even impressed Doma is pretty telling. What she doesn't have in power, she more than makes up for it in her speed in terms of the speed feats, with Doma even going so far as to proclaim that she's the fastest Hashira he's ever fought in battle, and given how old Doma is, that's pretty telling. That's a high compliment. The fact that she's also willing to eat small bits of poison each day in order to have that poison inside of her bloodstream so that she can kill a demon long after she's been eaten by a demon is also something that has to be factored in here. Once she's been ingested by Upper Moon number 2, the poison attacked him from the inside out and slowed him down to a point where Inosuke and Kano were able to strike him down in combat. Between this and the high level speed and the fact that she's able to keep fighting despite losing so much blood, Doma wondered himself, was Shinobu even human? Which is another mark of how deadly she is, which is why I do feel like she needs to be at 20. Now, at number 19, we have Zenitsu, who, like Inosuke, got a boost in power right before we got to the final arc of the series. Zenitsu's speed, especially when he's asleep, is what makes him so deadly. We saw this when he instantaneously chopped off the head of the tongue demon and was able to land effective blows on the spider demon by himself. The battle with Daki also showed the progression in his power, especially given the circumstances behind that fight. When we see him use his Godspeed, we're told at first that there's a set limit to how much he can actually use it, but by the time we get to the final battle, we see him spamming it with more proficiency, all while keeping the speed and the power of the attack itself up to its maximum. When we see him fight Kaigaku, the new Upper Moon 6 that we're introduced in the final arc, we see Zenitsu fighting and matching the attacks, though at first he started out on the defensive, and eventually he showcases that he's stronger than him by whipping out his 7th form, which is his own creation that sees him dash forward at speeds too fast to track with normal eyes, that unleashes a forward slash and a lord stance that produces a dragon-shaped thunderbolt. At number 18, we have Kanao, and the version that we're going to be using of her isn't going to be her base version, but instead it's going to be the version of her that uses the vermillion eyes. When she uses the final form of her flower breathing, the vermillion eyes, she gets an overpowered hacks to her eyes. It's a technique that raises her vision to the absolute maximum that literally slows down everything in her eye of sight down to slow motion. The ability to do this comes at great cost because it does cause enough strain to the eyes that if she uses it too long, the blood vessels in the eye will bust and it will end up blinding her. And what's even crazier is that if she does lose one eye, she can still use the technique with the remaining eye. This also gives her the ability to predict attacks and movements, and it gives her an edge to stay one step ahead of her opponents for as long as the enhanced vision is active. On her own, she might not be physically stronger than everyone on the list below her, but this ability, in my opinion, is enough to have her jump this high up on the list, though it is worth noting that in her battle with Doma, she was possessing the speed and reflexes to remain somewhat relevant in the battle, with Doma taking note that her movements and the way that she was able to use that speed and flexibility in that battle were pretty impressive. And even in the final battle with Muzan, she managed to hold her own briefly. Again, what makes her so deadly is her enhanced vision, which even Doma notes that because of this power, she's actually more powerful than Shinobu, which is another reason why I put her higher up on this list than Shinobu. At number 17, we have Gyutaro, one of the former Upper Moon number 6s. Gyutaro is previously stated to be powerful enough that Muzan did believe that had he fought without Daki at the start with the fight with Tengen, he could have won that fight, considering that he was able to fight off Uzui and push him to his limits and was strong enough that he forced Tanjiro to awaken his Demon Slayer mark. I think this is an appropriate spot to place him here on this list. Part of what makes him so deadly is his ability to detach his core from his body and even augment the powers of his sister when he gives her his eye, which also gives him the ability to coordinate his attacks with her. Also, given that he can't be killed unless his head's cut off at the same time as his sister, is another thing he has going for him. As we saw in the battles with Tanjiro and Tengen, his speed is pretty insane, moving so fast it looks like he's teleporting when moving at high speeds, and the fact that he's easily keeping up with Tengen, who is the fastest Hashira in terms of raw speed, is absolutely telling, because Gyutaro was not only keeping up with Tengen, but he was also landing hits and moving away before Tengen could fully react, and fast enough to block a kunai assault from Tengen's wife with utter ease. His ability to make lethal poison that is placed into his blood sickles makes him even deadlier. Those that aren't killed right away find themselves weakened, where even Tengen, someone who has a high tolerance to poison, was eventually hampered by it. Since the poison did come from Gyutaro, this has to be factored in when ranking him higher than Tengen, which again, given that Tengen is immune to poison, speaks volumes to the potency of it. His blood demon art is blood manipulation, which allows him to manipulate his blood into becoming weapons like sickles, and given the sheer number of blades and how much he can span them, it's arguable that he doesn't run out of blood while he's using his blood demon art. He's also shown the ability to alter the trajectory of his slashes and changing their shape, which when combined with his poison inside of them makes him a much deadlier opponent. The rotating flying blood sickles sees him release a wave of slashes at massive range that can move in a circular manner that serve both his offense as well as defense, like when he used them to prevent his head from being cut off. The fact that Tanjiro needed his Demon Slayer mark to awaken to win is pretty telling, and is a big part of the reason why number 17 feels like it's most appropriate. At number 16, we're going to be going with Rengoku, making him the third Hashira who we have on this list so far and finishing just outside the top 15. The reasoning is pretty simple. Rengoku, while strong, definitely got surpassed by quite a few Demon Slayers in the final arc, especially when we consider the Demon Slayer marks and the fact that there are Upper Moons who are significantly stronger than him. That being said, Rengoku's still pretty tough. The battle with Upper Moon number 3 is a sign of this. While there is a very solid argument that Akaza wasn't going all out against Rengoku, the fact that Rengoku, after saving dozens of innocent people on the Mugen train, protecting Tanjiro from an attack, and fighting against Akaza while once checking on Tanjiro's well-being and then seemingly trying to deflect the flow of battle away from Tanjiro to keep him safe, is very impressive. Though even as Rengoku began to go through his various flame-breathing techniques, it quickly became clear that he was out of his league. But being strong enough to survive getting a hole in the stomach stomach and having enough strength to hold Upper Moon 3 in place to where he couldn't immediately break the grip and had to resort to relying on cheap methods to escape is still impressive, and doing so without a Demon Slayer mark is impressive as hell, but that's not enough for him to crack the top 15. At number 15, we have Nakime, who eventually attained the rank of Upper Moon number 4, which just off the ranking is a testament to the power. Her Blood Demon art is unorthodox but useful, allowing for her to avoid Mitsuri and Iguro before beheading her in a battle. In the Infinity Castle arc, she's able to detach her eyeballs from her body, which allows her to spy on targets from long range, and this allowed her to locate all the Demon Slayers who raided the Infinity Castle. And based upon the battle in this arc, we know that her combat speed isn't anything to turn our noses up to, because she was shown being able to react to several of Iguro and Mitsuri's attacks, with both of them being pretty fast in terms of combat speed. Her Blood Demon art allows her to hold an absolute dominion over the space of the Infinity Castle and alter it when she plays her Biwa. She is shown being able to make rooms in the pillars and using them to crush her targets. She's shown shifting the rooms and the walls like they're extensions of her own limbs, and she's been shown making portals that can transport people out of the Infinity Castle or to other places within the castle, and even using it defensively for one of Mitsuri's attacks that were aimed at her. While she's not shown in a super complex way in terms of battle strength, this overpowered ability, while very simple to the point it's childish, it was enough to give two very powerful Demon Slayers enough of a battle that the annoyance was clear when they were dealing with her in combat, which does get factored in here. At number 14, we have Mitsuri Kanroji, who due to her Demon Slayer mark and the training arc that occurred afterwards ranks her above her former mentor Rengoku, who is down at 16. Mitsuri uses love breathing, a branch off of flame breathing, but it's a combination of her superhuman strength, which is 8 times that of normal humans, and her insane flexibility and the movement of her whip-like sword, and her Demon Slayer mark that puts her this high up on the list. When she fought Upper Moon number 4's clone, she was able to fight off the clone, which in of itself is already very powerful, and being able to come out of that fight without a major injury as well is a feat in itself. By the time we get to the battle with Muzan, we see her get tagged as one of the first of the Hashira to feel Muzan's power. At some point, she was just operating off of sheer instinct trying to survive that battle with Muzan, but she eventually gets taken out of the battle due to the injuries suffered. That being said, this is Muzan, the king of the demons, so going out in a battle against Muzan, it isn't anything to be ashamed of. At number 13, we're going to be going with Upper Moon number 5, Gyokko, and for this one, Gyokko and Mitsuri, in my opinion, they're interchangeable, and while at first I had Mitsuri above Upper Moon number 5, I think he barely edges out Mitsuri even with her Demon Slayer mark, which is why I say it's interchangeable, because if they fought 10 times out of 10, I give the victory more often than not to Gyokko. Gyokko's power isn't to be unmatched, being stronger than both Gyutaro and Daki, and in this battle against Muichiro, we see part of what makes him so formidable. He was able to outright overpower Muichiro for a good portion of the fight and almost successfully killed Muichiro, a Demon Slayer prodigy and a descendant of Yorichi, but it becomes pretty clear in my opinion, had he not been toying around and fought with killing intent from the start, Muichiro never would have gotten to the point where he awakened his Demon Slayer mark, which in of itself was enough to allow Muichiro to kill him. A big part of what makes him so deadly is his insane durability and the thick scales that are layered over his skin that makes him damn near impossible to cut through, and the speed is fast enough to react to and avoid several of Muichiro's attacks, and was more than able to hold his own against Demon Slayer mark Muichiro for a brief period of time, including avoiding a sneak attack and moving so fast that he basically came as close as you can to literally teleporting during a fight. With this Blood Demon art, we see him being able to move between the various bases that he has, which makes him incredibly hard to deal with in battle. This is before we even consider the fact that when he touches something in its true form, it turns it into a fish. Techniques like the 1,000 needle kill fish are broken because he summons fish demons from his vases that shoot out large numbers of poisonous needles. 10,000 gliding slime fish allows him to summon 10,000 fish from various pots to attack his enemy, and the fishes, if they are cut, release a poison before they die, and that poison is something that can be absorbed through the skin. On a personal note, this is one of my personal favorite characters because of the Blood Demon art being so thematically centered around aquatic life forms, and the way that he uses those porcelain vases was something I always found interesting as a reader. Now at number 12, we have Muichiro, the Miss Hashira. Despite being extremely young, strong. Muichiro more than lives up to the bloodline that he comes from. Muichiro beating out Upper Moon number 5 after awakening his Demon Slayer mark, and in the manner that he did, is enough to place him here at number 12. Muichiro is also the first Hashira in this series to be able to turn his blade red, and in the battle with Upper Moon number 1, he was able to hold his ground in that battle and even stab the strongest of the Upper Moons. But that being said, there's a giant gap in power between the two, and Muichiro wasn't the only Demon Slayer Upper Moon number 1 was facing. But it is worth noting Muichiro did play a pretty significant role in eventually defeating Upper Moon number 1. His misbreathing allows him to take advantage of his baggy clothes, which hide his limbs and make it harder to read his movements when he's attacking, combined with the mist, which can obscure his objects even further, making him appear to be as though he's moving slower than he actually is a huge problem for anyone on this list below him. Now at number 11, we're going to be going with Upper Moon number 4, Hatengu, who will be just outside our top 10 list. Hatengu, in particular, his clones, when we factor in the different fighting styles each of them have, while he does hide away his main body, his clones, they're no joke. They were able to take on and pressure a stronger Tanjiro than the one who fought against Upper Moon number 6. Nezuko and Genya, each powerful in their own right and more than hold him off. When the clones fused into the Zohaku 10 body, that clone became a freaking monster, fighting off Mitsuri, Tanjiro, Genya, and Nezuko at various points during that battle. Despite Mitsuri awakening her Demon Slayer mark, she was still on the defensive in that battle, and at times it looks as if she was being pressured to a point where she might still fall in the battle despite the Demon Slayer mark, and had to rely and trust in the other Demon Slayers to find the main body and destroy it. Even Tanjiro makes it known that Mitsuri was in over her head despite the Demon Slayer mark, realizing that she was going to run out of stamina at some point and get killed. Between that and being able to survive the bullets from Genya's Nichiren steel bullets, the same bullets that tore off the necks of his clones, his durability is pretty insane. Even when Genya tried to chop off his head, the blade broke apart, and even when Tanjiro turns his blade red, he was able to initially tank it briefly without a hit. Though with more effort, Tanjiro did make more inroads into trying to cut off his head. His reflexes are also impressive as hell, evident by the fights that we see in the Swordsmith Village arc. Most dangerous is obviously his Blood Demon arc, the emotion manifestation, which allows him to make clones that receive a kanji for specific emotions on their tongues, and all of them have different powers, and each of them are incredibly strong. Facing all of them at once is a freaking nightmare given how versatile they are, which is a big part of the reason why he's as high up on the list as he is. One has the ability to make electricity shock the enemy that can also cover a wide area to shock multiple people. Another has the ability to send powerful gusts of wind strong to clear an entire area and leave behind craters. Another has the power to release sound waves that can stun the enemy. The Zohaku 10 clone can use all the prior mentioned abilities, but at a higher level than all the prior clones. And some of you guys might argue he is top 10. However, I can't in good conscience put him above number 10 or number 9. With number 10, we're going to be going with Iguro at 10. Iguro is another character who is pretty cracked when you sit down and you look at everything that they've done and their fighting style. Even while being fully blind, Iguro was able to face Muzan with Tanjiro, which is pretty impressive, and in that battle he was actually being useful. Fighting against Muzan for a long period of time like he did is really impressive, especially given the way Muzan's attacks were structured and meant to keep the Demon Slayers at a distance, and Iguro still found a way to survive a lengthy period of time in that battle. When we factor in the Demon Slayer mark in the red Nichiren blade, and the fact that in that Muzan battle, Iguro was fighting with Mitsuri, his love object clearly on his mind, and a source for his indomitable fighting spirit, because as we've seen before, when someone's fighting for something they believe to be bigger than themselves, there's a stubborn boost to their resolve and fighting power. That is something that we do have to factor in. Even without the final battle against Muzan, there was quite a bit there with Iguro that made him really impressive, like the battle with the new Upper Moon 4 in the final arc, but he made his argument for being cemented at the number 10 spot in that Muzan fight, where he not only managed to get in some pretty good hits on Muzan, but fighting alongside Tanjiro, they're able to push Muzan into a corner on their own, and Iguro played a very critical role in helping defeat Muzan when we look back at that fight. So at number 9, we have Giyuu. We saw Giyuu in the battle with Upper Moon number 3 more than hold his own, and while he did have help from Tanjiro, Giyuu showed that he's got enough of that dog in him to push Upper Moon 3 into a more serious fight, especially once he uses his Demon Slayer mark. We've seen Giyuu in a sparring match hold his own against Sanemi, the second strongest of the Demon Slayers, so we know that he's a monster in power. Just given if we go by raw power alone and nothing else, Sanemi is undisputed the second strongest Hashira, so Giyuu being a Hashira in the top 10, that makes more than enough sense. Giyuu's power and skill were remarkable enough that more than once Upper Moon Moon 3 tried to make him into a demon, which Giyuu obviously rejected, and during that battle, he showed Akaza's praise was more than warranted because Giyuu was slicing off his limbs repeatedly, and Akaza flat out says it's been 50 years since he fought against a water Hashira as strong as Giyuu, which is very high praise, and as a reader makes you realize that Giyuu calling himself the fake Hashira was out of pocket, because as a user of water breathing, we have more than enough evidence to say that he is the definitive water breathing user. The fact that he was able to last out against Demon King Muzan and help deliver one of the final decisive blows against him is another further testament to his power. And even in the brief battle against Demon King Tanjiro, that showed that Giyuu, despite being heavily fatigued and extremely injured, was every bit the monster that fans say he is. The fight with Muzan saw him briefly turn his Nichiren blade red, which allowed for greater damage against Muzan and continue to slow down his regeneration abilities. When he uses his Dead Calm, we saw that he was able to push back some of Muzan's attacks, though even with Dead Calm having the limits that it does, when you're able to negate a decent number of Muzan's attacks, there is some praise for your character's strength that has to be considered when making a list like this. Now at number 8, we have Sanemi, the second strongest Hashira from a combat perspective. Anyone powerful enough that Upper Moon 1 has to praise them is an absolute monster. He and Gyomei did extremely well against Upper Moon number 1. His recovery abilities are just downright insane. So is his durability, which is off the charts, being able to survive attacks and damage that would have killed anyone else had they been struck by it. We see the guy take a mortally fatal wound and continue fighting because he's a Giga Chad, a Tyrone, a Hector, and every other masculine name you can think of, all rolled into one. In the Muzan battle, he was more than holding his own and keeping up with Gyomei and Iguro as they fought against him. These three were holding their own in that Muzan fight, standing toe to toe with Muzan longer than Muzan likely would have anticipated them being able to do. While some might say had it not been for Gyomei and Muichiro, he probably would have died in the battle with Upper Moon number 1. I do think it says more about the character that after receiving those injuries and fighting in such a difficult battle, he still went on to fight and stand his own against Demon King Muzan. He's arguably the second fastest Hashira in combat speed, with him moving so fast that there are times people thought he was teleporting. His stamina is another thing that makes him high up on this list. Being able to survive a battle with Demon King Muzan for over half an hour with no rest is just downright insane to think about. Number 7, we have Gyomei, the strongest of the Hashira. Like Sanemi, he was complimented by Upper Moon number 1, who said that he had to go back 300 years to think of a demon slayer this powerful, which going back that far to find someone as powerful as Gyomei is a testament to his power, especially when you consider the dude's fighting while blind. He was able to turn the tide in battle against Upper Moon number 1 more than once in that fight, which is scary considering he's doing this with no eyesight. Out of all the Hashira, he's the one who delivers the hardest hitting blows, and his presence is more than powerful enough that Tanjiro and Inosuke, with the latter having a sharp sense that's almost as primal as a wild animal, knew right away that this was the alpha amongst the Hashira. This guy was the guy you don't pick a fight with. In just 2 months, Gyomei was able to reach the rank of Hashira, and when we consider he was able to fight and do well against the strongest of the Upper Moons for a considerable amount of time, even before he used his Demon Slayer mark, is another sign of how physically strong he is. Despite the injuries that he suffered, Gyomei pulled up to the Muzan fight ready for all the smoke that was thrown at him, and he was able to assist in a key junction of that battle against Muzan. Despite being so bulky, Gyomei has superhuman speed that is almost as deadly as his raw physical strength and his insane hearing, which was so hacked that he could hear the flesh of Muzan when it was regenerating. His speed is shown by the way that he was able to keep up with Upper Moon number 1 as well as Demon King Muzan's movements, which without having any eyesight makes it extremely scary to think of what he could have done had he been able to see. At number 6, and just outside of the top 5, we have Akaza, the third rank of the Upper Moons. Akaza is easily one of the strongest characters in the series, being so strong it took Tanjiro and Giyuu, both of whom had their Demon Slayer marks awakened, to try and take him down, which makes a lot of sense given he wasn't using his full power against Rengoku, who before all the other Hashiras got power clipped via the Demon Slayer mark and the training that took place before all of this. Rengoku was easily one of the stronger Hashira at that time, which is why his death shook the Hashira to the core like it did, with many of them expressing shock that he'd been defeated. Due to being a demon, his stats got a massive boost, which is why when you look at his insane martial arts skills, which are good enough to hold their own against high-level swordsmen, and combined with his ability to sense fighting spirit and predict the movements of his enemies' attacks, makes him one of the scariest demons on the list. It took Tanjiro, whose level of swordsmanship was easily Hashira level by the end of the series, entering into a selfless state, which is a hard counter to Akaza's extrasensory perception. Even after losing his head, Upper Moon number 3, through sheer willpower, was able to keep fighting, and he regrew his head, and had he not lost that strong willpower, there's a solid argument that he could have killed both Tanjiro and Giyuu if the fighting had continued. This is even crazier when you consider the fact that Upper Moon 3 never ate any women during his time as a demon, which according to Doma slowed down his growth as a demon by a considerable amount. When you think about it, him being this strong as a demon makes perfect sense, given that when he was a child he was slapboxing with grown men and outright dogging them out, and when he became an adult he took out 67 swordsmen on his own using his bare hands, which was enough that Muzan, the king of the demon, who saw all types of crazy things in his lifetime, saw this and swore up and down that it had to have been the work of a demon behind the carnage. So when you make someone this strong into a demon, you can see why Upper Moon 3 is as powerful as he is. When you factor in his insane durability, he becomes an even more formidable character, being able to give Rengoku trouble when he tried to chop off his limbs and unable to chop off his head, stopping just short of being able to complete the task, though Rengoku was severely injured when this happened. Given a much stronger Tanjiro, who had long since surpassed Rengoku, and Giyuu were having trouble with Akaza, I think it's safe to say that if Akaza had been 100% serious and fully on guard, Rengoku's blade wouldn't have gotten as far as it did. His regen is just downright broken, being able to regenerate his head even after it's cut off, and based on what we've seen, even before we get to this, his regen speed appeared to be even faster than the upper ranks that are below him. His combat speed was enough that Inosuke, someone who has really good perception, described it as being on a different dimension, and even when he was facing Giyuu, who had his Demon Slayer mark awakened, Upper Moon 3 had no problem matching his speed. His combat power is downright broken as well, being strong enough to shatter swords and destroy a chunk of Doma's head with an attack, and when using his blood demon art, his strength gets another boost on top of his physical strength, where we see him leave craters behind in the ground from some of his attacks. This much force behind the attacks of easily one of the best hand-to-hand combat specialists in the series is a recipe for instant death, just as the shockwaves he created as he was punching the air was enough to throw Rengoku back on the defensive. His final form, Blue Chaotic Afterglow, is an omnidirectional attack that sends hundreds of blows at his enemy, and it was enough that it negated Giyuu's Dead Calm, which is extremely impressive when you consider exactly how Dead Calm works. Number 5, we have Doma, i.e. Upper Moon number 2. Easily holding down the 5th spot is Doma, the second strongest of the Upper Moons. In the final arc, we see he was able to downright overwhelm Shinobu and hold off Inosuke and Kano, both of whom after the training arc were easily at a Hashira level. He's cocky for a few good reasons. He was able to surpass Akaza in only a short amount of time, and given how powerful Upper Moon number 3 is, it makes you realize how big of a monster he is. The fact that he was able to absorb humans by touching them in only a few seconds makes him really deadly. Proof of this comes from how he was able to quickly take Shinobu into his body, killing her almost immediately when he did so. Granted, we know in hindsight Shinobu allowed this to happen so that she could kill Upper Moon 2 from within, but this is a pretty scary ability when you look at it at just its face value. His durability is also off the charts. We know Kano and Inosuke needing to work together to cut off his head, and this is on top of Shinobu's poison taking a very heavy toll on his body. We have a very strongly implied statement that shows that Doma's even faster, because when Akaza seemingly speed blitzed him and destroyed his head, Doma made it a point to say that if he wanted to, he could have easily dodged the attack, and based on the wording, I don't think this is something that he was lying about, but given how easily Upper Moon number 3 was able to match the speed of Demon Slayer Mark Giyuu, this makes Doma one of the strongest demons in the series. The only reason why Inosuke and Kano were able to even stay in the fight as long as they were was a combination of Shinobu's poison and the fact that Doma was playing around with them. If he really had killing intent when he snatched Kano's sword, or he had taken Inosuke's mask, both of them would have been dead. The only other person who comes even close to him in terms of hand-to-hand combat is Upper Moon 3, and even then Doma's just that much further ahead. But we also see him use his dual-wielding Japanese war fans, and when he uses them, he was easily pressuring the demon slayers that he was fighting, despite the fact he wasn't using full power, and given that he can perform multiple attacks in the blink of an eye, it makes him dangerous enough to be this high up on the list. His blood demon art allows him to generate ice from his flesh and from his blood, as well as manipulate it however he sees fit in the battle, making it one of the more versatile blood demon arts that we see in the series. And the temperature's cold enough that even Shinobu worried that her lungs are gonna burst, and he nearly froze Kano's body. Inhaling the frosty mist is a guaranteed death because it will cause the cells inside your lungs to die off and make breathing impossible. Doma is another example of characters in this verse who is a matchup nightmare, and though he was defeated, given the circumstances forces behind his defeat, I don't think it's crazy to say that if he battles Shinobu, Kano, and Inosuke in a best of 10, that he's going to win 9 out of those 10 times, with the only time that he's lost being the first battle that we saw in the manga, and that's largely due to his own arrogance and why he lost. Now at number 4, we have Upper Moon number 1. Now this shouldn't come as a shock either. Being the older twin brother of Yoichi, the strongest demon slayer to ever live, you rightfully expect this man to personify greatness on a different level, i.e. God mode, and that's basically what he does. A former demon slayer turned into a demon, he became the very thing he used to hunt down, which is a bit of poetic irony, but it's telling that for a majority of the series in terms of demons, he's second only to Muzan for 99.9% of the series in terms of sheer power. Anyone fast enough to blitz Upper Moon 3 and cut off his arm before he could react is a problem child, and given that he's been around for 500 years as a demon, that's a lot of power and experience as a demon, which combined with this demon slayer training, it makes him extremely deadly. Even scarier is the fact that Upper Moon 1 also awakened the demon slayer mark during his lifetime, which we know becomes a monster in terms of the power boost it gives. During the final arc, at times he was able to bully Muichiro, who also possessed the demon slayer mark and was considered a prodigy given his age and his power. This man not only sliced off Muichiro's hand, but he also proceeded to stab him with his own sword before he could even react. Even Sanemi had trouble with Upper Moon number 1 in their battle, and only Gyomei was able to put up enough of a fight to come close to matching his power, with Gyomei having its demon slayer mark awaken at one point during that fight. It took Sanemi and Gyomei fighting together to begin to pressure him, and even then he was able to fight both of them off simultaneously despite both of them having their demon slayer marks. It took Muichiro, Genya, Sanemi, and Gyomei working together to ultimately take him down, and that's telling considering he was fighting 3 demon slayer Hashiras who all possess the demon slayer mark, which also gives them a huge amp in their power. Bringing down Upper Moon number 1 required Muichiro and Genya to give their lives, which is another testament to how strong he is, especially considering 2 of the Hashira he fought had red Nichiren blades at one point during that fight. Given how he died, it can be argued that it wasn't so much that they killed him and more so that he let himself get killed due to realizing what he'd become in his pursuit for power, but that's a topic worthy of its own video essay, and it would take up too much time here in this video. He's also got the ability to see into the transparent world and see the muscles, the blood flow, and the joint movements of his enemies, which allows him to predict movements. Due to his sword being made up of his own living flesh, he's able to regenerate the blade and change its shape, and when we consider his transformed state gives him the power to match that gruesome appearance, it makes him even more dangerous. The same with him being able to adapt to the fighting styles of his enemies and having extensive knowledge of breathing styles, being able to immediately recognize Muichiro's misbreathing after only seeing one attack. As crazy as all that is, his moon breathing becomes even more insane when you realize that we're literally looking at the second most talented swordsman in the history of the franchise, who was so far ahead that it was stated that his skill and Yorichi's skill with the techniques was so advanced they couldn't hope to pass him down to future generations. His moon breathing alone has 16 different forms, making it one of the most extensive breathing styles that we have in this series. In the top 3, we're going to start things off with the Michael Jackson of the franchise, Muzan himself. For 99.95% of the series, Muzan's power only came second to Yorichi, the original demon slayer, and for a really good reason. He's broken and was considered the demon king during 99.95% of the series, undisputed by anyone. We saw him in what was supposed to be a weakened state wipe out 100 demon slayers with no issues. He was able to more than fight off demon slayer Mark Tanjiro and Giyuu in a battle, and it was in the final battle with Muzan that everyone who fought him came to a very harsh realization. They might have fought against other Upper Moons, they might have killed Upper Moons, but Muzan was a whole different tier of power that none of them were physically at. His attacks were so fast and lethal that more than one of the demon slayers who fought against him in that final fight couldn't dodge the attacks by seeing them, but instead had to give in to their primal instincts and dodge off of instinct and sheer luck, which is another sign of his power. Being able to fight off 4 marked Hashira and 3 demon slayers of Hashira tier power is one of the most impressive displays of power that we have in this series, further proof that Muzan and the 2 characters above him operate on their own tier of power. Muzan's final form isn't something that a lot of fans like based off of what I've seen, but the idea of his body using so many whips is pretty ingenious in my opinion. The demon slayers use swords in combat, and Muzan's whips allow him more flexibility and speed than the swords, and they're able to keep the demon slayers at a distance, making it harder for them to land solid hits on his core of his body unless they have insane levels of speed. The whips that he produces were at one point able to outright overwhelm 4 marked Hashira Hashira and 3 Hashira level fighters. He was shown battling the strongest members of the Demon Slayer Corps for an extremely long period of time, cutting off Gyomei's leg and cutting off Giyuu's arm. He might have eventually been taken down, but he more than took a few people with him in the process. Tanjiro, using sun breathing and mimicking the movements of Yoriichi, was able to get in some of the best shots on Muzan during this fight, but it says a lot that a sun breathing user had to be the one that got some of those hardest hits on him. It took all of these powerful fighters, the effects of the drug wearing him down, even to allow for a situation where Iguro and Tanjiro were able to push Muzan into a corner, and even after his stamina plummeting, he still held off the trio of Zenitsu, Tanjiro, and Inosuke despite the handicap. Even when the sun was about to come up, Muzan still dished out massive amounts of power and damage. By the time he was eventually defeated, it was with casualties on the Demon Slayer side, with Gyomei, Mitsuri, and Iguro killed in the fight, and even Tanjiro briefly died when his heart stopped before Muzan revived him to make him into the new Demon King, which brings me to number 2 on this list, Demon King Tanjiro. Tanjiro surpassing Muzan is pretty poetic, especially given the circumstances that led to Muzan trying to make Tanjiro his next Demon King. While we don't see him as Demon King Tanjiro for long, Demon King Tanjiro is clearly superior to Muzan. It was outright stated that Tanjiro had the potential to be a much bigger problem than Muzan due to the sunlight resistance, and when factoring in he could use sun breathing, there was a belief that Tanjiro would even match or surpass Yoriichi, the man who single-handedly almost killed Muzan and spooked Muzan for hundreds of years after their first fight. Demon King Tanjiro was so powerful that it led to Giyuu calling him invincible. This is partly due to the fact of how quickly Tanjiro developed resistance to sunlight and is able to move about in the daylight. This by extension means that all Nichiren blades and the red Nichiren blades are less effective against Demon King Tanjiro, and when you add in the regenerative abilities of Demon King Tanjiro, he's the strongest demon we've seen in the series, and it isn't even close. Demon King Tanjiro was shown growing bone-like whips and appendages from his back, meaning his fighting style would have been similar to Muzan's, being able to fight from a distance, but given he was able to use sun breathing, it makes him an even bigger monster. The only reason we didn't see his full potential is largely due to the fact that Tanjiro was struggling with the power raging through his body, and his mind had not calmed down like Muzan's did, where he was fully aware of what he was doing. We see him shoot balls of energy from his mouth that make shockwaves that are strong enough to blow several demon slayers away in the process. Had Tanjiro never been turned back into a human, there's no doubt in my mind he would have done exactly what the narrative was suggesting, which is either have caught Yoriichi in power or outright surpassed him. Finally, at number 1, we have Yoriichi, the strongest demon slayer in history of the series itself and the literal strongest character of the franchise, by enough of a landslide that really he deserves to be in his own tier of power. Between having the Demon Slayer mark, access to a transparent world, and the selfless state, and being so insane with his swordsmanship that the Yoriichi Type 0 doll needed several limbs and swords to even attempt to mimic his movements, Yoriichi was a monster. As a child with no training at all, he took down skilled swordsmen with no issues. This level of power and skill eventually grew to a point where he was able to almost kill Muzan, and left him so scared of Yoriichi that Muzan, the king of the demons, called him a monster despite Yoriichi being a mere human. Just the memories of Yoriichi that live in the blood that Muzan gives to other demons is enough to paralyze him with fear the moment that those memories surface, which is another testament to his power. Upper Moon number 1, when he battled Yoriichi, even admitted that despite Yoriichi's old age, he was still strong enough to be considered in his prime in terms of his power, and had he managed to get a second attack off, Upper Moon number 1 would have been killed. Unlike the other demon slayers who get the Demon Slayer mark and die by the age of 25, Yoriichi was able to live well into his 80s, which is likely due to the fact that he was born with the Demon Slayer mark. His red Nichiren blade was able to burn Muzan on a cellular level and slow down his regeneration, and it left scars on Muzan's body hundreds of years after the fact. His combat speed is on another level. When Muzan divided his body into 1,800 pieces trying to escape, Yoriichi in only mere moments was able to destroy 300 pieces, putting him well above anything else speed-wise that we've seen in the series. His swordsmanship was so unrivaled by anyone. This much we know isn't just a narrative hacks form, because we see it with how easily he was able to put that work in on Muzan, and despite the fact that he was in his mid-80s, he was able to almost kill Upper Moon number 1, and honestly he would have killed him if he hadn't have died of old age. His sun-breathing style is so difficult to learn that only Tanjiro as a swordsman was able to master using it, though Tanjiro's ancestor memories were able to mimic the styles via the Hinokami Kagura dance, but the fact still remains that when others tried to use sun breathing, they couldn't, which led to the creation of the various different breathing styles we we see in this series, because they can all trace their roots back to sun breathing, which is another sign that Yoritsu is just built different. However, that's going to be it for the top 25 strongest characters in Demon Slayer. As always, if you disagree with the list, let me know down below.